Carl Jung didn't fear death. He feared that we'd forget what happens between lives. What if your dreams weren't dreams, but memories of a place your soul once called home? A place beyond death, before birth. A space where your soul chose your parents, your wounds, and even the people who would break your heart. They buried this interview for a reason, not because it was nonsense, but because it was too true. In his final days, Carl Jung whispered what he could never publish, that death is not the end, and life isn't the beginning. A crackling tape, a small wooden room in Zurich, and the voice of a man. Slower, quieter than we remember, but filled with something deeper than theory. Remembrance. Before we are born. We remember after we die. We reflect. Between lives, we choose. This is the part Carl Jung never put in textbooks. This is the interview they never aired. And what you're about to hear may awaken something ancient inside you. Let's begin where no one expected. Not with a theory, but with a truth that was hidden. Because the world wasn't ready. It wasn't filmed. There were no lights, no microphones dangling from the ceiling, just a handheld recorder, a wooden chair creaking beneath the weight of a man who had seen too much, and a single candle flickering in the corner of the room. Carl Jung was 85. His body had begun to slow, but his mind was still a cathedral. Inside it, memories, symbols, wars, spirits, and silence. He knew the end was near, and perhaps that was why he agreed to the conversation. Not for publication, not for theory, but for the soul. The journalist who sat across from him was not well known. No transcripts were officially released. Only fragments, a handful of notes recovered years later from a sealed folder in a Swiss archive marked "Nicht veröffentlichen, do not publish." It began without preamble. Jung looked up and said quietly, "I've spent my life studying what people forget, but now I want to speak about what the soul remembers." He folded his hands, looked out the window, and began telling a story no one expected. He spoke of a place between lives, a space outside of time, not a heaven, not a void, but something else. When we die, he said, we do not vanish, we return, not just to rest, but to understand. This idea wasn't new to him, not born from fantasy or myth. It came from dreams, from patience, and from Jung's own near-death experience in 1944. He described it once in his journals how during a high fever, he left his body, saw the earth from above, and felt the presence of a realm beyond personality, a place where souls gather, where choices are reviewed, and where the blueprint of the next life is quietly drawn. Between death and birth, Jung said, we are not lost. We are more aware than ever, but not as individuals, as energy, as consciousness preparing to return. He described it not as a judgment hall, but a chamber of reflection, where the soul meets its own shadow, where wounds from the previous life are laid bare. Not as punishment, but as preparation, we see the lives we touched, the pain we caused, the love we gave, and we feel it all, not through the mind, but through the heart of the soul. The journalist asked, is that what determines where we go next? Jung nodded slowly. Yes, but it's not about reward or karma as debt. It's about what the soul still needs to experience in order to remember its wholeness. He believed that before every incarnation, the soul participates in what he called a sacred agreement. It chooses lessons, people, even the pain, not consciously, not like ticking boxes on a checklist, but from a place far deeper than logic. The soul doesn't seek comfort, he said. It seeks integration, and sometimes that means choosing a life that will break the ego, to awaken the self. So why wasn't this interview ever released? Why were his words buried? There are several theories. Some say his publishers feared backlash. Others claim the church quietly requested it stay private. A few even believe Jung himself left instructions to keep it hidden until the world was ready. But perhaps the real reason is that what he shared was not meant to be heard with the ears, but felt with something deeper. He spoke of soul groups, how the people we meet again and again are not random, how your child may have once been your parent, how your greatest enemy may carry the last key to your awakening. The field between lives is not ruled by hierarchy, Jung said. It is ruled by frequency, and souls of similar vibration are drawn together, not to repeat the past, but to transcend it. He grew tired during the recording. There were long pauses. At times, he closed his eyes, not from sleep, but as if seeing something invisible to the rest of us. I do not fear death, he said near the end. What I fear is that we forget what happens between. He leaned forward, voice nearly gone. The world believes death is the opposite of life, but it is not. Death is the opposite of birth. Life has no opposite. That line ended the tape. No otro, no signature, only the quiet sound of the recorder stopping, and a sense, not of ending, but of return. What did Jung truly believe about the soul? Not the theory you'll find in lectures or books, but the belief he whispered when no one else was listening. In the next part, we'll open that door. There's a silence that follows truth, not because it is hard to understand, but because something inside you already knew it and simply forgot. That's the kind of silence left hanging in the room after Carl Jung spoke about the soul. In public, Jung was careful. He spoke in the language of psychology, of archetypes, dreams, and the unconscious, but in private, to close friends and a few chosen students, he spoke differently, not in the language of the mind, but in the language of memory, soul memory. The soul, Jung once wrote in his personal letters, is older than the body. It is not created at birth. It enters the body like light enters a room. He did not see the soul as something mystical or religious, but as the core reality of who we are. The body was temporary, the ego a mask, but the soul, that was the deep current beneath all things. He called it the self, not the self in a personal sense, but the capital S self, the archetypal soul within, connected not just to your own story, but to something Jung called the collective unconscious. We are not isolated beings, he said. We are threads in a larger tapestry woven through time, space, and spirit. Jung believed that what we call individuality is like a leaf that has forgotten it belongs to a tree, a single flame that forgets it came from fire. The soul is not inside the body, he said. The body is inside the soul. And he meant that literally, through dreams, Jung believed the soul speaks, not in sentences, but in symbols, water, stairs, windows, hands reaching, faces with no name. These were not just tricks of the sleeping brain. They were fragments of soul memory, speaking in the only language the mind can barely hold. He often said, "The dream is the hidden door to the innermost chamber of the soul." But here is what made his views dangerous, and perhaps why this part of the interview was buried. Jung believed the soul not only survives death, but chooses life. He believed we are not thrown into this world randomly, but drawn here with purpose, with agreements, with patterns, with people to meet again. The soul chooses the conditions necessary for its evolution, he said. That includes the timing, the family, the wounds, even the name, not from logic, but from alignment. The journalist had asked during the interview, "Do we all have a soul?" Jung's answer was quiet but firm. Yes, but not everyone remembers they do. He believed that forgetting the soul was the true crisis of modern humanity. Not war, not poverty, but soul amnesia. He called it the great psychic sickness of the West. To believe we are nothing more than a body, a bank account, a resume. When the soul is forgotten, Jung said, people begin to seek power. Because they no longer remember they are powerful by nature. He saw depression, addiction, even some forms of anxiety, not just as chemical imbalances, but as symptoms of a disconnection from soul, from meaning, from depth. That's why Jung never fully aligned with the strict scientists of his day, nor with the religious orthodoxy. He walked a middle path, the psychological spiritual bridge, where symbols, stories, and sacred wounds all pointed to something beneath the surface, something timeless. The soul is not a belief. He whispered in that interview, it is a presence, and if you are quiet enough, it will speak to you. So when people say Jung was only a psychologist, they forget what he feared most, not dying, but dying without ever remembering who you really are. In the next part, we'll enter the space Jung called the most sacred of all, the space between death and birth, where the soul sees itself clearly and begins again. Carl Jung never claimed to know exactly what happens after death, but he said something few psychologists dared to say. What comes after is not darkness, but meaning. He called it the in-between, a psychic space, a liminal field, not bound by time or gravity, but shaped entirely by consciousness. In that hidden interview, he whispered what had lived only in his journals and his dreams. Between the moment your breath stops and the moment your next begins, there is a place where your soul returns, not to rest, but to understand. It's not heaven, it's not hell, and it's not a void. It's more like a mirror, a dimension of deep inner reflection, where there are no masks, no bodies, no language, just the self, the soul, and the truth it can no longer avoid. There, Jung said, we are met not by angels, but by ourselves. He believed this in-between space was where the soul faces its life review, but not as a judgment, not from a god, but from within, a remembering, not just of what you did, but of what you became. You feel the pain you caused, not because you're punished, but because your soul wishes to feel it, so it may grow. Jung had encountered this space once before, in 1944, after a heart attack. He floated into what he described as a state beyond identity. He watched the earth from far above, saw a temple, felt peace so profound he wept when he returned. But he said the most powerful part wasn't what he saw. It was what he understood. We are not beings who have a soul. We are souls who temporarily inhabit form. The journalist had asked him, what do we do in this in-between? Jung leaned back and answered with something rarely heard in academic halls. We meet our shadow, not the ego's shadow, but the soul's shadow, he explained. In this space, we're shown what we refused to see while alive, the moments we looked away, the love we withheld, the truths we silenced, not as punishment, but as integration, because the soul doesn't seek approval, it seeks wholeness, and wholeness requires light and dark, truth and contradiction. Jung believed this in-between realm was also where choice happens, the choice to return, the choice to evolve. He called it the pre-birth council, where the soul, alongside spiritual intelligences and fragments of memory, chooses its next incarnation, not randomly, but symbolically. What appears as fate in life, he said, was once agreement in the in-between. The traumas, the parents, the timing, they're all symbols, reflections of a soul's unfinished story. The soul chooses not what is easy, but what is exact. He emphasized this. You don't return to be punished. You return to remember what you forgot. And perhaps even more mysteriously, he suggested that while we are in this realm, we are not alone. Jung said the dead do not drift into isolation. They return to soul clusters, circles of familiar spirits, people you've known, not just in one life, but across many. He compared them to constellations, each soul a star, sometimes close, sometimes far, but always orbiting the same truth. You find each other again and again, he said, because you carry a piece of each other's light. And when it's time to return, to be born again, the soul moves not through space, but through resonance. It's drawn toward the family, the culture, the conditions that best match the next lesson it longs to learn. Birth, Jung whispered, is not the beginning. It is the soul's re-entry into the theater of memory. In the next part, we explore the question so many have asked. If this is all true, why don't we remember? Carl Jung believed the forgetting wasn't a failure. It was part of the sacred design. You came here knowing, not with facts, but with feeling, somewhere inside you, beneath your habits, your name, your timeline. You still carry the memory of who you were and why you returned. But you've forgotten, and Carl Jung believed that was no accident. The soul forgets, he said, because to remember too soon would interrupt the very lesson it came here to learn. He likened the process to entering a stage play. The actor must forget it's a play, must believe in the script, the role, the stakes, in order for the transformation to be real. Jung called this sacred amnesia a veil placed gently over the soul at the moment of birth, not to punish, but to protect, because memory, true soul memory, is too vast, too eternal, for the mind to carry while living inside the boundaries of a single lifetime. The ego cannot hold the weight of eternity. He once wrote, so the soul gives it what it can carry, one chapter at a time. But forgetting doesn't mean it's lost. The memory is buried, not erased, and it leaks through in dreams, un déjà vu, in the quiet ache that says, I've been here before. The soul speaks not through logic, Jung explained, but through symbols, through feeling, through timing. He believed recurring patterns, especially painful ones, are not curses, but calls, clues from the unconscious, faint echoes from lives before, messages from the deeper self, a relationship that feels strangely familiar, a fear that has no clear source, a place you've never visited, but miss like home. These are not accidents. They are soul leaks, the unconscious trying to remember what the conscious mind is not yet ready to see. The unconscious is not just the forgotten, Jung said. It is the eternally remembered awaiting recognition. But why would the soul choose to forget itself? Jung believed that transformation can only happen through experience, not knowledge. If you remembered every betrayal, every death, every love lost across lifetimes, how would you open your heart again? If you knew the end of the story, would you still take the journey? We do not come here to know, he said. We come here to become. Still, the soul leaves breadcrumbs, and Jung believed that every life includes moments, subtle, sacred, where the veil lifts. You meet someone who feels like a mirror. You hear music that brings you to tears for reasons you can't explain. You stand at a crossroads, and you just know which path is yours. These are not coincidences. They are rememberings, moments where your soul touches the edge of the veil and whispers, here you are. Again, the journalist once asked Jung, if remembering is so important, why is it so rare? Jung answered not with a theory, but with a metaphor. The soul is like the moon. Most of it is hidden, but in the right light, the whole of it is revealed. He added, the point is not to remember everything. The point is to live in such a way that when the memory returns, you recognize it as your own. He also believed the body stores memory in the nervous system, in the way we breathe, hold tension, react to intimacy. The body, he said, is not just a vessel. It is a recording device, a sacred archive. Trauma that has no origin in this life, he said, may belong to another. He wasn't alone in this. Modern studies in epigenetics, somatic therapy, and transpersonal psychology now echo what Jung intuited a century ago. The soul remembers, and so does the body. But the question remains, How do we reconnect with the soul's memory without overwhelming the mind? Jung had a quiet answer: through dreams, through symbols, through silence, not by forcing memory to return, but by creating space for it, through journaling, through active imagination, through surrendering the ego long enough for something ancient to surface. When the ego becomes quiet, he said, the soul begins to speak. In the next chapter, we go deeper, because once the soul remembers, it chooses, and Jung believed that before every life begins, your soul has already seen it all, and still said yes. Carl Jung never formally published a theory of reincarnation, but read between the lines of his private letters, journals, and last interviews, and something remarkable emerges: a quiet, persistent truth. He believed we come back, not in circles of punishment, but in spirals of transformation. The soul, he once said, is drawn back into form not by fate, but by the magnetism of what remains incomplete. He described reincarnation not as doctrine, but as a psychic necessity, a return not for retribution, but for restoration. So how does the soul choose its next life? Not as a checklist, not as a reward, but as an alignment between where the soul is and what the soul still needs to remember. Jung used a word here that few others did: pattern. He believed that the unconscious carries patterns through lifetimes, not memories you can replay like a video, but energetic imprints, tendencies, pulls, themes that follow you like invisible gravity. What the ego sees as coincidence, Jung wrote, the soul knows as continuity. Before returning, the soul enters what he described as a symbolic landscape, a realm of archetypes, of choices not made in language, but in image, resonance, and emotional weight. In this space, the soul senses the people it is meant to meet, the wounds it is ready to face, the shadows it must finally integrate, the love it is meant to both give and receive. Jung believed that this space between incarnations is where the soul is most honest. There's no ego, no distraction, only clarity. There, he said, we choose the pain that will break us, only so we can learn to break open. He told a story once never published in full about a patient, a woman who kept dreaming of a child crying in a cold house. The child had no face, but the feeling was unbearable. Guilt, loss, unfinished love. She had no memory of a lost child in this life, but Jung guided her inward, through the dream, through the symbol, through the silence. And what emerged was a memory, not from this lifetime, but from a life before, a choice she had once made, a grief she had once buried, and a promise her soul had made, to return and try again. Reincarnation is not about who you were, Jung said, but about what you carry, what you bring forward, what still seeks to become whole. The soul, in his view, is not climbing a ladder. It's weaving a tapestry. Each life adds thread, color, shadow, light. You don't come back as a reward. You come back because your soul wants to understand something from the inside out. That's why Jung believed you may be born into pain, into poverty, into illness, not because you deserve it, but because the soul chose conditions that would wake it up. Not all suffering has meaning, but much of it is the soul's invitation to go deeper, to finally feel, confront, release, and transform what has been waiting for lifetimes. The journalist asked him once, so we choose our families, even the ones who wound us. Jung's answer was quiet, especially those because they mirror what we have yet to heal. He also spoke of soul groups, clusters of spirits who reincarnate together, playing different roles across different lives. A mother becomes a son, a rival becomes a teacher, a lost lover returns as a child who changes your life. The people you cannot forget, Jung said, are not from this life alone. They are part of your pattern. And what about the timing of our return? Jung believed it's not random. There are cycles, moments in collective evolution where certain souls are called to return, to serve, to shift, to heal lineages. You did not come here by accident, he said. You said yes, even to the hard things. He ends the section of the interview with a single, powerful line. Reincarnation is not a system. It is a love story between your soul and what it longs to become. In the next part, Jung confronts one of the hardest truths. Why must pain be part of the journey? Why is suffering, especially in the in-between, so essential to the evolution of the soul? Carl Jung didn't romanticize pain. He didn't believe all wounds were sacred. But he knew this: there is no growth of the soul without suffering. Not because suffering is holy, but because it is honest. He called it the fire between lifetimes, a space the soul must pass through, not as punishment, but as purification, in the in-between, after death but before return. Jung believed the soul doesn't rest. It reflects, and in that reflection, it sees fully, finally, the consequences of its last life. The love it withheld, the truth it avoided, the parts of itself it denied. This is not a courtroom, he said. It is a mirror, and what we see in that mirror is often painful, but not the kind of pain we feel in the body. It's deeper, soul deep, because there we feel not just our choices, but their impact. Every word that wounded, every moment we looked away, every gesture of love we never made. The soul reviews not from shame, Jung said, but from longing, the longing to return more whole. He called this process the reintegration of shadow. In life, the ego protects itself from darkness by projecting it outward, by blaming, by denying, but in the in-between, there is no ego, no defense, only shadow and self, and the invitation to finally bring the two into union. The journalist asked him, "But why must we suffer? Why can't we evolve through joy?" Jung replied, "We can, and often we do, but suffering is the great interrupter. It stops the performance. It pulls the mask off, and when we are raw, we become real." He didn't mean that pain is noble, but that pain strips illusion, and in the in-between, the soul is shown how much of its life was spent asleep, moving through routine, fear, pretense, and it grieves not because it was bad, but because it forgot. Jung believed grief is one of the soul's highest functions, because to grieve is to remember what was sacred, and to ache for what was missed. Sorrow is not weakness, he said. It is memory trying to return through feeling. In the in-between, this grief is not judged. It is held by guides, by archetypes, by aspects of the self that are infinitely patient. No soul is condemned, Jung whispered, but every soul is called to account, not by law, but by love. He described the space like a spiritual surgery. The soul lies open, and all that was unfinished rises to the surface, not to harm, but to heal. Sometimes that means facing the people we hurt, not in form, but in energy. Sometimes it means re-entering a memory, not to relive it, but to finally complete it. Jung believed that many of the challenges we face in this life are echoes from that healing chamber. We meet someone and feel a wave of guilt. We feel drawn to a place we've never been, or we carry a deep sense of sorrow that has no origin in this life. These are signs, he said, that your soul is still working something out. From that space between suffering in life, he said, is often a continuation of what the soul began in the silence between lives. But he was clear about one thing. We are not here to suffer endlessly. We are here to turn suffering into understanding, and that understanding becomes light, compassion, wisdom. The soul is not made of purity, Jung said. It is made of wholeness, and wholeness requires that we carry what once carried us. He offered one final metaphor before ending this part of the interview. Imagine a cracked bowl in life. we cover the cracks. But in the in-between, we fill them with gold. In the next part, we follow the soul as it prepares to return. But it doesn't return alone. It returns with others. And Jung believed that the people who break us are often the very ones who came to help us remember who we are. Carl Jung never used the term soul group the way modern spiritual teachers do, but the idea was already woven through his work. In his view, we are not isolated beings drifting through time. We are entangled consciousnesses, connected by story, memory, and unfinished emotion. Some people come into your life and feel instantly familiar, he said, not because you've met them, but because you've remembered them. He spoke of constellations of souls, groups of beings who reincarnate together, each time in different roles. A parent becomes a child, a rival becomes a lover, a stranger becomes the one who saves you. Not for drama, but for completion, the soul returns to the ones it has danced with before. Jung explained, because there is choreography still unfinished. In the in-between, before a soul returns to life, it senses these others, not by name, but by vibration, familiar, magnetic, necessary. Jung believed these connections are not always soft or easy. Some are deeply challenging, some push us to the edge, but always, they carry meaning. He told a story off record about a patient who was terrified of her daughter, not because of anything the child had done, but because of what she felt when looking into her eyes, a fear, a recognition, a grief she couldn't place. Through dreams and deep analysis, Jung helped her uncover something unspoken, a soul agreement from another life, a bond forged in tragedy, one that was returning now. For healing, we do not meet people by accident. Jung said, we meet those who are aligned with the soul's most urgent work. He emphasized that love is not always gentle. Sometimes, the souls who love us the most play the roles that hurt us the deepest, not out of malice, but out of agreement, because only they can touch the place in us that still needs to awaken. Forgiveness, he said, is sometimes remembering the contract you made before you forgot. In the in-between, according to Jung, the soul meets these familiar energies, not face to face, but essence to essence, and together they decide who will play which part, what wounds will be reopened, what love will be regiven. It's not fate, it's choice, a choice made beyond ego, beyond fear, in the realm of the self. The journalist asked, so even the people who harm us, did we choose them? Jung was careful. Not all harm is sacred. Not all trauma is chosen. But he believed that in many soul groups, roles are exchanged for the sake of healing. The ones who hurt us in this life may have loved us in the last, and what appears as betrayal may, in truth, be the soul's deeper choreography. This perspective, Jung believed, doesn't excuse cruelty, but it expands meaning, because when we begin to see the same patterns, the same faces in new bodies, the same dramas in different settings, we are not cursed. We are being invited to choose differently, to remember, to complete. He believed that our deepest triggers in relationships are often soul echoes, unfinished emotions from previous lifetimes, still vibrating in the present. A conversation that feels like it started years ago. A kiss that feels like a homecoming. A goodbye that breaks you more than it should. These are not coincidences. They are contracts. Jung also said that some people come into our lives for only moments. A stranger who comforts you. A teacher who says one sentence that changes your course. These, too, are soul companions. Not always for a lifetime. Sometimes just for a turning point. The soul is not loyal to time, he said. It is loyal to transformation, and the ones who return with you, again and again, do so not because they have to, but because, on some eternal level, they chose you. In the final chapter, we return to the last moments of Carl Jung's life. What he whispered to a student by his bedside was never meant to be a theory. It was a reminder that you were never lost, and you were never alone. The final hours of Carl Jung's life were not dramatic. There was no crowd, no grand farewell, only a few close students and the quiet breath of a man preparing to cross a threshold. He had studied his entire life, not with fear, but with awe. One of his students, whose name was never released publicly, recorded his last words in a private notebook. He didn't speak as a scientist or as a philosopher. He spoke as a soul. He was drifting in and out of sleep, but when he opened his eyes one final time, he whispered, "We are not human beings trying to become spiritual. We are spiritual beings, remembering how to be human." Then he closed his eyes again, and after a long silence, he added, "Tell them the in-between is real." Those were his last words, not about dreams, not about archetypes, but about the soul's journey, a journey that does not begin at birth and does not end in death. He knew the world wasn't ready, that most would dismiss it, that many would forget. But he also knew that someday you would hear this, because this was not information. It was a reminder, something your soul already knows, something you've felt in dreams, in silence, in the unexplainable moments when life feels too familiar to be random. Carl Jung's legacy was never just psychology. It was recollection, the recollection of the soul, of the shadow, of the self, of the invisible thread that weaves all lives together, not just in this body, but across lifetimes. And now, as his voice fades, what remains is this: you are not just here to heal your childhood. You are here to remember your soulhood. And when you feel lost, remember, the ones who truly love you have always known how to find you. Even between lives, maybe you've met them already. The ones you keep finding, the lessons that won't let go, the dreams that feel more real than reality. These are not accidents. They are echoes of something ancient, of something sacred, of something your soul is ready finally to remember